Well, it is an absolutely beautiful day here north of Brooklyn, Ontario, and I am not in a Ford Mustang, but I am in a car that tried to compete and react to the Ford Mustang. The Ford Mustang is one of the most influential cars in American history. It changed the way that Americans built and bought cars. And this Dodge Dart from 1966, well, it was doing its best to keep up. So we're going to talk about how the Mustang influenced this 1966 Dodge Dart and why this is a slept-on car that I think are a great buy in today's market. So turn on that engine. And let's go drive the car that tried to compete with the Mustang. 3-speed automatic, put it in drive, and we're going. It is a beautiful day to be driving a 1966 Dodge Dart GT convertible. But before we get to this 1966 Dodge Dart, I want to talk about, I'm going to roll up the window here for better audio if I can. It's quite dirty. Sorry, Fred. So before we get talking about the Dodge Dart GT that we're in right now, we got to talk about the prehistory of the Dodge Dart. And the Dodge Dart name first appeared on a 1956 show car that was bodied by an Italian coach builder. There were two concept cars in 56 and 57. They were just concepts, they looked neat. But it appeared on a production car for 60 and 61 model years, and it was kind of a in-betweener car, the Dodge Dart in that era. It was like kind of a mid-size, kind of a full-size. And then we had a really weird one-year only Dodge Dart for 1962 only, which again was kind of a mid-size and the full-size thing. But this is a third generation Dodge Dart, and this generation only ran from 1964 to 1966. And the idea with this car from the very beginning was to make a compact, something like the Chevy Nova, which was then called the Chevy II, II, Roman numerals. And in 1964, when this generation launched, it actually didn't even offer a V8. You had your choice of a 170 cubic inch slant 6 or a 225 slant 6. And we've talked a lot about the slant 6 in an earlier video about the 1971 Plymouth Scamp. Anyways, it was not a performance car. Obviously, you couldn't even get it with a V8. But the Mustang's arrival in 1964 and a half, debuted in April of 1964, kind of forced Dodge's hand. And luckily for them, they had a brand new engine to offer in the Dart, which was the LA small block. And it was offered in a 273 cubic inch configuration, 2-barrel or a 4-barrel. And that is when we start to offer the Dodge Dart GT. Now, just like the Chevy SS models of the 1960s, when we hear Chevy SS, we think, ooh, I bet that's a big, gnarly performance car. Back in this era, kind of early days in the muscle car era, they were just kind of trim dress-up packages. You could have gotten a Chevy Nova SS with a 6-cylinder engine back then, and by the same token, a Dodge Dart GT did not get you a V8. You could have totally spec'd a slant 6 Dodge Dart GT. In fact, most of what you got was on the inside. You got this really cool console with a floor shifter. Every other Dodge Dart was a column shift. And you got these two bucket seats, which were quite sporty for the time, instead of a split bench or even just a standard bench seat. So you got the buckets, you got the console, and you also have some pretty unique trim around the car. I personally like the little fender blades up front with the GT logo. You got a GT badge on the back, and a few other just kind of sporting touches and around the car. But there are no suspension upgrades with the Dart GT, and there were no engines that you got with it. It was essentially a sporty appearance package. They had your two versions of the 273 small block that you could order. There was a 180 horsepower 2-barrel engine, and this is actually a really cool one, a 235 horsepower high compression 273 4-barrel. For a brief window in 1966, there was also basically a super stock cheater package offered, and that was a Take No Prisoners ultra high compression solid lifter 273 built to go dominate in super stock racing, drag racing. And not only did it compete in NHRA drag racing, but it also did some duty in the SCCA sports car classes. So, believe it or not, these cars did race in period. So the Dodge Dart GT, excuse me, so the Dodge Dart GT does actually have some competition in, provenance. I am very happy with this Charger 273. That's right, the Charger name debuted on the 65 version of this high-performance 273. And then in 66, they introduced the Dodge Charger, but the first car to kind of wear that name was right here under the hood. It's a Charger 273. Another interesting thing about this that the Mustang kind of made people do was they actually cared about the appearance of the engine for like the first time that I can think about in Mopar history. This car has black crinkle finish valve covers and a cool little decorative aluminum fin, which also doubles as a plug wire organizer that was actually glued onto that valve cover. It's purely decorative and doesn't serve an actual function. Its whole job was to make those valve covers look nice. Now, when this generation of Dodge Dart came out, it was styled by a guy named Virgil Exner. Virgil Exner is basically famous for making weird cars. If you see a weird 1960s Mopar, it was probably drawn by Virgil. The first year cars had these big round headlights, and there were styling elements around the very first year Dodge Dart which kind of harkened back to the Chrysler Turbine car, which you have to remember was happening at a similar time. And we actually did a really cool ride along of that video on driving.ca with my day job, so I got to be a passenger of one of those. But the turbine car styling influence were very apparent in elements of the early car. But by 1966, when this car was made, they toned a lot of it down. That early cars had like an asymmetrical space-age dashboard. This has a very plain, just straight across horizontal dashboard layout. The jet exhaust taillights became a little bit more conventional. And for 1966, again, to compete with the sporty image of the Mustang, they redid the body again. In fact, the 1966 model wears 1 year only front fenders with those two little vents scalloped into the side of them and a much more squared off front grille than the earlier cars. The reason was to make it look more conventional, more aggressive, and sportier, again, to compete with the sales success that was the Mustang. Now, 1966 was a pretty popular year for the Dart. They sold about 176,000 of them, and of those, only 30,000 were GTs, and of those, only a third had a V8. So how rare is this 1966 Dart GT with the high compression V8 and a convertible? I don't know, but it can't be very many, and there's certainly not very many left. And I feel very lucky to drive this very rare car, which is loaned to me for the day by my good friend Fred. Fred, or Freddie B as we call him on some videos, is actually the guy that helped me bring back the paint on my 1974 Ford Maverick. We did a video where we buffed that thing out and made it shine again. So the story is that Fred bought this car like 30 years ago, and he was scrolling through a bunch of ads. He wasn't scrolling, like there was no internet. He was flipping through a bunch of ads, and he was kind of looking for like a Chevelle of a similar era, but even then, a Chevelle convertible 30 years ago was pretty darn expensive. So what he did find was this car. And he wasn't specifically looking for a 66 Dart GT convertible, but he wanted a 60s American car with a V8 that was a drop top, in decent shape, in budget, and he bought it. And Fred has been driving this car for 30 years. In fact, he puts like 3,000 or 4,000 miles on this car every single season. And this window is so dirty because I know he never puts it up. Fred only puts the top up in emergencies. He's personalized it. It's basically peppered with little stickers all around the car, most of which are very funny and a lot of which I cannot show on camera. Fred's a great guy. I really appreciate him loaning me this car for the day. And I love driving classic cars like this 1966 Dodge Dart. And if you like this video, if you leave a comment, if you subscribe, stuff like that, it really does help me out and make more videos like this. And if you have a car you want to see featured on the channel, like this 66 Dodge Dart, please reach out to me at classiccarsandclayton@gmail.com. But now I gotta tell you what it's like to drive this car. So you might think, we got a high compression V8, we got GT badges, wow, this thing must be quite a performance machine. And let's pour it into the turns and see how it drives. Well, the first thing you're gonna feel is the manual brake pedal. In fact, it still has like the kind of old-timey suction cup design that Mopar was using in the late 50s. Manual brakes, this car would have come from the factory with four-wheel manual drums. Fred has converted it to disc brake front, but it's still a manual system, so the braking is, I would describe it as adequate, but certainly not like good. It's okay. And the handling, it's a power steering car. Again, a lot of these American cars are manual brakes, power steering. Steering wheel is completely numb. I don't know what the front wheels are doing. I'm not communicating at all with them. We're not on speaking terms. It will corner pretty nicely because it doesn't actually weigh that much, about 3,200 pounds or so. But what you do have is a lot of power. Kick it down into second and punch it. Listen to that V8. And that's 60 right there. It's way faster. And I would say the definitive American car driving experience of the time is a lot of power and not much else. In fact, we'll get into it here from a dig and just watch what it does. So we'll just punch it. 273, 235 gross horsepower. Here we go. It's spunky. Upshift's a little quick, I think. There it goes. I mean, honestly, that's quite a bit of power. And certainly, if you think of it as a trifecta of like power, handling, and braking, it's got way more power than the other two. It's not a road hazard. I don't feel like I'm about to fall off the road, but it's just, this is the American experience of the time. A ton of power, and then just, whatever will do for brakes and steering. That said, it is an absolute blast to drive, and its compact size, relative to American cars at the time, means it actually handles great. It's beautiful to drive on these little country roads. I've got all this power. I've got a convertible. I could hear that V8. Interestingly, this car would have had a 2.5-inch single exhaust from the factory. Fred has converted it to duals, so maybe a bit louder than stock, but the sound of that small block is so cool. And I think the 273 is a unique driving experience because this engine was the first ever performance MoPar small block, and it carried that torch until 1968 when we got the Dodge 340, well, MoPar 340. But until the 340 came out in 1968, this was the hot small block, a 273. So I actually think it's a really cool engine to drive. But when you're not like hustling this car is where it excels. You get a V8 soundtrack. I have all the stretch out room. The steering column is completely non-adjustable, so it's a little closer than I'd like, but the bucket seats are comfortable. I mean, the visibility can't be beat. I have a V8 soundtrack. I can look out the back and just see the remnants of the vestigial fins of the Exner design. And it's nice to be driving a V8 1960s car that doesn't drive like a boat. I mean, it's not nimble, but I don't feel like I'm captaining a ship. So ultimately, this is the last year of this generation. In 1967, a new fourth generation Dodge Dart would debut, and that took the Dart into a completely different league of sportiness and the performance. We got the GTS model and factory big blocks in the compact Dart, the 383, the 440, and even the legendary Hemi Superstock Darts. It became crazy pants. And of course, you could have gotten it with a 340 in later years as well. And that is because MoPar had to do a rethink, because Ford had showed that the people wanted a sporty compact that was affordable, looked good, and also offered major firepower under the hood. And so this car, I think, is interesting because it is in a watershed moment for MoPar. Before this, you had weird, wacky, Exner-style giant cars with huge 413s and cross-ram engines. And after this car, you have smooth Coke bottle shapes, big blocks, small blocks, stripes, and stickers, the muscle car movement in full from MoPar. And this car is right on the edge. It bridges the old with the new. And I think it's such an interesting spot in history for MoPar. This is kind of right before they went committed to the muscle car movement. And because it's in this kind of strange spot in history, I think that a lot of people aren't thinking about these cars when they shop for muscle cars, because I think I speak for a lot of people. A lot of people want a 1960s V8 muscle car type vehicle to drive around, but those are very expensive. And I think just like Fred did when he was originally shopping and ended up buying this car, you should consider these 65 and 66 Dart GT models. They did also come as a coupe. I don't personally love the lines of the coupe. I would get a convertible. But if you price this against any other V8 MoPar convertible, it's absurd. This is such a good buy if you can find one. Like I said, they made a lot of Dodge Darts. The vast majority are slant six sedans, and I do enjoy those. But if you're specifically looking for a GT V8 convertible, oof, it's gonna be tough to find. But if you find one, I think they represent a really good value. It's an interesting car. You don't see this model around a lot. You see a lot of the later cars. And I gotta say, it's a great usable classic. In fact, Fred told me that he gets up to 27 miles to the gallon with this car. It's sporty, it's fun, it's comfortable. It even has a real trunk. One funny thing is reviews of the time complained that the trunk keyhole was actually too low on the car. And to be fair, it does look like an afterthought. If you look at the rear chrome on the trunk, it's just kind of like dented in a spot. It's not very ergonomic. Yeah, it's just one of these things. It was clearly an afterthought because they want to put some big chrome trim. So that's my review of the Dodge Dart GT. I think it's a super interesting model that we don't get a chance to see a lot of, and I feel really fortunate that my friend Fred let me drive it for the day. I hope you enjoyed watching, and if you want to see another MoPar review, check out my review of the 1971 Plymouth Scam. And if you want to see and hear what it's like to drive this car without me talking all over it, I did a POV drive, which you can see as well on the channel. So if you just want an ASMR video of just driving this car in the beautiful countryside, check that video out too. And now I'm gonna kick it in the second and enjoy the rest of my day. Did I kick it in the second yet? Some gas. There we go. Listen to that. Thanks for watching.